very glad to see so many of you here. So my name is Maria, I'm the Head of Investor Relations and FDI for the Estonian Investment Agency here in the UK, and I'm so very glad to be joined by Dr. Marko Sjöblom, the founder of the British fintech group Fiinu, and Rivo Uibo, the co-founder and chief business officer of Tuum, which is the modular core banking provider. Fiinu and Tuum very recently announced a partnership where Fiinu's Plugin Overdraft product is using Tuum's core banking modules. And so today we're here to talk about this partnership and how open banking in general can improve consumer outcomes. So maybe to just kind of kick off, if both Marko and Rivo, you can shortly introduce yourselves and what both Fiinu and Tuum do.
Will do. Thank you. Well, what's wrong with all of you? We're talking about overdrafts here. It's not supposed to be exciting. So I'm Marko, originally from Finland. I have a peculiar interest on overdrafts. I have a PhD in overdrafts, and probably the only one in the world. And I've also got an interest on building startups. Clearly, this is the second startup I've built. Having gone through the process with the Bank of England for 5.5 years, and then listed the business on the London Stock Exchange, we've gone through quite a journey overall. And within that journey, we've been very selective on who we want to sort of work with. Here, of course, Tuum is one of them that is so-called material outsourcing provider for us. So we've gone through quite an interesting journey. We'll talk about that in a moment. But that's who we are, and that's who I am. Very briefly, Rivo.
Hi everyone, I'm Rivo, and already as Maria introduced, I'm one of the co-founders of Tuum, which is the next generation core banking suite. But on a daily basis, I'm also like a chief troublemaker at Tuum, so that I try to, let's say, organize those kind of engagements that we have here, like with Marko. And also at Tuum, we are also we have embarked on a very important journey, and so that we are like on a mission to make sure that core banking will never become the legacy again. And I can imagine that this is like something that many of you can relate to one way or the other. And looking forward to our chat today.
Brilliant, thank you. So, Marko, obviously we're going through multiple crises at the moment, and it all impacts the cost of living, and for the average consumer this all can be quite daunting. And then I understand that Fiinu's Plugin Overdraft is on a mission to help millions and millions of people with financial inclusion. So can you maybe elaborate on the product, on the Plugin Overdraft, and what makes it special, and why is a product like that even needed?
I mean, Plugin Overdraft is literally what it is. It's an overdraft which you plug in to a bank account. That's all it is. Of course, it's a little bit more complicated than that when you start looking at the nitty-gritty of what's underneath that. The market and the landscape in this country has changed dramatically in the last 4 years in particular, not only because of the cost of living crisis, but because of change in regulation as well. So if we go back in time, 4 years ago, we had 62% of the population using some form of overdraft at least once per annum on a rolling basis. Today, we had a change in regulation about 2 years ago. Today, we only have 20% of the population getting access. So in a landscape where you have over 100 million bank accounts, you have 80 million of them that do not have access to any form of overdraft. With the cost of living crisis and everything else, whole landscape has changed. The banks are steering away from basically helping people with this type of very, very short-term, small amount. They're tightening their underwriting criteria, moving away from this market when the demand is growing at the same time. So people actually need more and more this type of help. The trouble we have on a very massive scale is the fact that we have some alternatives that are non-bank lending products, and unfortunately quite a few of these products have adverse effects on credit files. Overdraft, which is a banking product, it's a restricted expression, as you know. Like the word bank, you cannot offer or promote that product unless you have a banking license. Helps people to build their credit files. It's sort of like a credit builder product, but the lowest of its type. There are credit builder credit cards and so on, but overdrafts can start with a very, very small amounts. That's the landscape. That's what we intend to address and why there's demand. So it's a huge scale on the lending side, very small tickets, very short term. And it's with that in mind, the technology platform, because it's a bank independent platform, so we serve all of the bank customers. So it's literally a platform, although we're a bank and we open up a bank account to each customer. But with that in mind, when we've been designing and building the platform, which has, of course, many, many components, you've got some components that are so-called material. So you have to go through a very specific process according to SYSC 8 requirements, document things and so on. But you also need to think of the scale. You want to see, can we internationalize this on this platform and so on. And this is why, of course, Tuum has played a very, very important role in our decision making, because we've got big plans, obviously. And so that's kind of where we are and how we ended
Can
here.
you maybe shed some light also like about the plugin overdraft, also like the value prop, how it works?
Yes, so it literally people open up a bank account with us, and within that process they get linked, or we link through open banking to their main account or main accounts, and that link stays alive. And so it's literally working the same way as if you have an overdraft from your main bank, if you're lucky enough to have one. But in this case, it's just been provided by another bank. So we're unbundling effectively overdraft from a current account. So it's a similar, you could think of TransferWise or Wise, who unbundled international transfers, if you like, from a current account. We're doing exactly the same, but for the overdraft market. It's the first in the world. It's a very similar business that I've already built before under running account credit in this country, but it wasn't an overdraft. So, like I said, it's quite simple, but innovative product. And we're not getting involved in any form of transactional banking at all. The only thing we do is we transfer money between our overdraft and the main account. So there's no cards, there's nothing. Everything stays as it is. People don't want to switch their banks, basically, and that's why we do it this way.
Well, thank you. Before we kind of go into the partnership between Tuum and Fiinu, obviously Tuum is working with a lot of different fintechs and different financial institutions, and then as Marco just identified, that overdraft is one of the kind of the big problems and opportunities that can be solved with kind of open banking solutions like yours. Are there other kind of trends and problems that you've kind of seen on the market that could be solved, or with Tuum's products?
Well, if you look also, let's say, the kind of innovation that Fiinu has now come up with, then I think there is one descriptive word, and this is disconnect between the suppliers, meaning the credit institutions and lenders, and also the ones in need, meaning that they are not just getting the meaningful stuff the moment they need like the financing capabilities out there. And definitely also like the way how like Fiinu combines the core banking systems, the open banking capabilities and initiatives, and also like having a very clear understanding that consumers don't need to necessarily move their main bank account from the likes of like Lloyds or HSBC over to Fiinu, but you're rather complementary. And therefore, like I think there is a lot ongoing which helps to like overcome this kind of a disconnect. And therefore also like in our view, also the open banking has enabled, let's say, or put the pressure on the institutions to actually start to modernize and also to open up. Because also like then we get into the kind of API first type of a world where you don't need to serve only your internal channels, but also you have to expose yourselves with all your like informational and instrument type of assets to the external world. And that is already like completely different world. So, and that's also like one of the ways how the institutions can like remain relevant. Because also like, if I would, let's say, sit on a board or like be some, let's say, executive VP or VP like in any of those institutions, I would come every Monday to the office and ask my team members how to remain relevant. Because the likes of Fiinus are like popping up every now and then, and I think that the competition will intensify at large.
Very good. Well, let's kind of go into the partnership and the process. So as you mentioned, Marco, Fiinu is a London Stock Exchange listed company, and I do have to mention that when we did have our kind of alignment call, that Fiinu's ticker is actually called Bank, and I'm absolutely astonished that no one else
I was as well, by the way. As a side note, I don't know if any of you have gone through a listing or is planning to do one, but when you start the process, one of the first things the at least London Stock Exchange excuse me, does is they ask you, what ticker would you like to have? And I almost as a joke said, well, Bank. and the fact that we actually ended up getting one, I'm quite surprised. Anyway,
yes.
Back.
And then obviously you also have a banking license and you're regulated by the FCA. And I understand that you went through quite an extensive and rigorous selection process when you set out to choose a core banking partner. So what mattered the most for you when you started this journey, and then who else did you consider? Obviously, I know that you can't name any names, and if you can, maybe just elaborate on the process and bring out some lessons learned, because I understand there's a lot to be considered during this process.
So the starting point is that if under the banking perimeter, so when you're dual regulated, PRA and the FCA, you have to follow the SUSC 8 outsourcing requirements. They're quite rigorous. With that in mind, we went through probably about 2 years in total from initial contact to contract, of which probably about a year was quite intensive overall, where we basically made a short list. We went through all of the, I'd say, the usual suspects. Those of you who know those are, you would immediately know who am I talking about, but let's not name or shame anybody for that matter. But within that process, when towards the end in particular, where we felt very comfortable with what Tuum was offering to us, is we had a chance to connect to their sandbox. We connected our app in that sandbox. They team, although it was more of consulting, but it was still within the sales. We explained that our investors would like to see how things work, which is exactly what we did. We created or simulated everything, and we also integrated one open banking provider in their sandbox in that environment, which helped us, of course, to secure also our 14 million pound Series A, because you're able to highlight or show the whole flow. Tuum obviously played a very important role in that, in whole of that process, but it gave us quite a unique insight on how does the system actually work. We had not committed to them at that point. And I think ultimately, of course, we went through scorecards, and it was very close, put it that way. But ultimately, I think it all details aside, ultimately it came to the fact that the founders and the people that are involved in Rivo, they created that sort of trust, and you sort of like, these guys will deliver for us. It wasn't perfect, but already during the sort of connectivity period, we asked a couple of things. They made those changes very quickly. There was not necessarily, say, a compounded interest, for instance, wasn't necessarily as a default. It was a flat. That was just added very quickly. So this gave us a lot of reassurance that if we do come up with any issues as such, the main challenge is for a new bank to select a bank that does not have 3 references in the UK. That was a big problem for us, because that's what the FCA in particular and their technical team wants to see, and your board typically wants to have those references. And so in a way we took a punt and said, okay, we believe that there will be others. We are the first bank, that UK-based bank, that will introduce this system. We had, of course, brought the name at that time as Modular Bank, but that was before the name changed. We had brought that to the regulators' attention. These are the shortlisted vendors that we're looking at, and we got a lot of questions from them. What is this tool? And we had to explain, and we then went back to these guys asking documentation about their processes, release a whole host of documentation we needed to provide to satisfy the SUSC 8 requirements for the selection. So it was a fairly smooth, well, long process, but fairly smooth towards the end. cooperation was good.
And then, Riva, maybe you can reflect on the experience from your side as well, because obviously you have a lot of other partners that you work with too, and then you go through similar selection processes. So maybe you can highlight it from your side.
Yeah. So that the good side is that like when you're in the core banking industry, then you know that nothing happens overnight. So that like makes you kind of feel, let's say, kind of at home. But yes, like I think, let's say, from the first interaction till the contract was roughly like the period of 2 years, where, let's say, the kind of intensified discussions and sandboxing and so forth took place like over a year. But what attracted us at Tuum was the fact that this kind of a launch of Fiinu, it was impact driven. And when there is impact, then the money and results follow anyways. And also when you really look at, there is like a specific segment, there is specific use case that you want to tackle, it's so understandable that you understand how the impact is created. And then you are, let's say, rather crafting a beautiful business narrative, not like building out any sort of like a tech platform. And that is a completely different story, that sometimes also when chatting with different institutions here and there, it's like, hey, I want to see like this or that feature. And then you ask that, but what is the impact? What are you trying to change? What, like, why does it matter? And we gained the kind of answers to our numerous whys each time. And I think that also like kind of enabled us to speak the same language at the same time.
But before we open the floor up for questions from the public, from the audience, obviously you're in the beginning of this partnership. But what else have you got in store for the future in the UK for Fiinu and for Tuum? What are the plans and what's going to happen?
I mean, we're focusing, of course, getting ourselves operationally ready to launch. This is the mobilization period. For those of you who know how you get the banking license first, and you're under a restricted license, and so we're focusing on making sure that effectively our technology business builds the technology for its first customer, i.e. Fiinu Bank, but it's all, of course, within the same group. Because we're listed, we can't really explain what other things we may have in mind or may not have in mind. I would need to share that with all of the shareholders at the same time, or anybody else in the market. So the focus is on the UK, launching in the UK to begin with. So we have until July next year to go through the process. The technology will undergo an external audit. This is what the regulators require. And in our case, it's one of the big auditors who will do that, and they will start that work, I think, in the first quarter of next year. The engagement has already started. And so we'll then see, and of course we will be making announcements accordingly, but I can't talk too much about future plans, I'm afraid.
Yeah, like London has a special place in our hearts. So that as Tuum is a little bit less than 4 years old, like one of the newest out there in terms of like the next generation core banking suites out there, but we have been growing at this kind of a massive speed that we cannot also ignore what happens here in UK and London also especially. So that and also patience hasn't been our middle name. So which means that before we like established the subsidiary and office here in London, we were able to already get quite a sizable number of banking and non-banking customers here. So that means now that growing the team, both like with their own like on-site solution engineering, business and sales resources. So that's gonna, let's say, double down over the coming periods.
Lovely. Well, thank you. But I would now, I'm sure there's going to be lots and lots of questions. So let's start. Yes.
Marco, do you consider yourself a lender? And also, how do you envisage dealing with bad debt when it comes along?
So we're a fintech group with the banking license. So what do we mean by that is we're building a technology. So that's how we're structured also. So we've got a technology business and a bank. And technology business has got its first customer, effectively, which is the bank. But it's all, as I said, it's under the same PLC. We're first and foremost building technology. but the banking license is an enabler for us to take deposits and lend the money out. Simply, you're not allowed to offer, as an example, overdrafts, as I said earlier, unless you have a banking license. You're not allowed to promote that product, or you're not allowed to call yourself a bank either. How do we deal with bad debt? Well, there is, of course, you have to accept that there is bad debt as well. And so we will most likely end up working with the panel of debt collectors. So it will be distributed across probably top 3 takers, and then those takers will then obviously show how they perform, and those they are sort of creating competition, if you like, amongst themselves. I don't think we have announced which panel we intend to use, but that's the sort of direction of travel that we're looking at.
Yes.
I've got 2 questions. I might have missed this explanation of Plugin Overdraft. Is it portable between bank accounts?
Is it what?
Portable. So can I keep the overdraft and move my bank account? And secondly, is this for SME as well as consumer?
Good question, actually. So we connect to any bank account, or it could be e-money account as well. So if you move your bank account, that would probably mean you close it. Is that the scenario you're thinking? So let's just say you had HSBC and you went to Barclays. You would have a line with us, so you could just add another account there. So you could have multiple accounts, but with us, you have one limit. So we treat you as a limit, if you like, and then you could split that limit across as many banks as you want.
Okay, cool.
But it wouldn't be per bank.
And SME?
SMEs, no immediate plans. We have a license to offer this to the SMEs, but that's not the focus right now.
Okay, the gentleman here.
So how, beyond the name, the fact that there's a banking license involved, how do you see yourselves as different to someone like Drafty?
Drafty is a very good a non-bank lender solution, which unfortunately has 2 issues the way I see it. One is they need to source their funding from the private market, which makes it costly. And then secondly, a non-bank credit products have oftentimes adverse effects on credit files. And that is a overdraft style product, but it isn't. There are others as well, Safety Net, Drafty, and so on in the US as well. We've got Bridget and Dave and so on, but they're not overdrafts. So that's really the key difference. Also in consumers' mind, overdraft, even the word overdraft, is the second most trusted financial product after mortgage. And a lot of the running account credit types of products are unfortunately towards the end of that sort of trust scale in terms of the consumer's minds and views. But Drafty is an overdraft style product. It's not a bad product in my opinion, but it's not ideal.
Yes.
Do you have an idea of the price point that you want to
Do I have a...
idea of the price point that you could launching your product?
Yes.
Obviously,
No. It will come at this stage. It's not in the public domain.
Okay. Yes.
What's your distribution strategy? Is this a B2C brand that you're trying to build, or are you going to work with other intermediaries?
So, a very good question. Pricing is also good, but candidly, you can't answer. Distribution is primarily direct, so to consumers. The way open banking, of course, works is the consumer consent to give that right for us to view and or manage their money through PISP part, and we do use also BRP for this product, which works brilliantly for Plugin Overdraft because it extends that strong SCA for those of you who know the space specifically. But of course, we are conscious of the fact that there could be also other methods, but primarily we're saying we don't need any banks to cooperate with us, and because it's a customer consent, it exists already. But that said, it's logical for us to look whether there are that type of opportunities, but it's a little bit too early. I don't think we're short of customers.
Okay.
Do you see the REIT consent as a challenge for you?
Sorry?
The open banking reconsent at the 90-day point when it expires, is that going to be a challenge for you guys?
I don't think so. So, first of all, VRP removes that because it's within, I don't know if you're familiar with the VRP, but VRP already, because this is within your bank, so you own both the accounts or all of the accounts that you connect this to. And for as long as you consent with that, there is no 90-day rule anymore. And I think the other thing is that the way the 90-day rule, the SCA, is moving, I'd say it's plausible that it will be extended from 90-day shortly.
Yeah.
And then secondly, when people are using the account, that could technically be deemed as renewing that within the latest changes or recommendations rather. And so no, I don't see that as an issue.
Any more questions? If not, then I will say thank you to both of you for this very interesting discussion. Thank you for the questions. I understand that you guys will I understand that you will stay behind for a bit, so if you have any direct questions, then you can do so. But thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah,